Revenues are the lifeblood of any business. Of course, without them, we have no business. So I felt it was critically important to spend an entire lesson showing you exactly how it works when you're booking revenue in Xero. Now, as I've mentioned, we're going to be looking at T accounts here because we want to take a look at what the debits and credits look like behind the forms when you're filling them out and when you're saving them, ultimately posting your transactions in Xero so that they can then be matched up with what happens in the bank feeds, which we've already seen. We're also going to take a look at something that Xero has only recently introduced as of the time I'm recording this, which is the quotes feature or estimates and the ability, frankly, to put a proposal out there for somebody to approve before it then becomes revenue. Come along with me. Let's see what this looks like. Xero and the sales cycle doesn't mean a zero sales cycle. In fact, when it comes right down to it, you may find Xero so intuitive and easy to use that Xero may actually serve to improve your sales cycle. I'm going to show you what I mean. We're starting out with a completely blank Xero company because if you've watched more than a few of my videos, you know that I like to do this so that you can easily see the impact of your transactions on the financial statements. So we're talking about sales, and anytime we're talking about sales, we need to go to accounts, and then we need to go to sales, right? Pretty clear, pretty straightforward. Once we go into sales, we can start recording sales. Funny how that works. So we'll wait till Xero catches up with me. And over here, I've got new. And if you just click new, it's going to take you right in to create a brand new invoice. So be aware of that. If you're not sure or you know that you need to do something other than an invoice, click the drop down. And as you can see in here, you've got choices, invoice, quote, repeating invoice, credit note. All that's pretty straightforward. You can also invoice to a contact group, and at the same time, it gives the opportunity to create that contact group. And I'd mention in the write-up that as a best practice, it might not be a bad idea to create a contact group in Xero for each customer of yours so that you can add all of your contacts within that contact group who belong to that customer. And then, as you can see, you can send an invoice to the whole group. Kind of nice. So the other thing I like to do when I'm doing something like this is, as I mentioned, I like to start with a blank and show you how the impact of your transactions affects your financial statements, namely the balance sheet and the profit and loss. So let's duplicate our tab here. We're going to right-click and choose Duplicate. In my case, that pop-up menu is coming up on my other screen, so you don't actually see it here in the video. But rest assured, when I right-click, the choice to duplicate is there. I'm using Chrome, and I would suggest that you do the same when you're running these cloud accounting products like Xero. So once I've duplicated this, I can go to Reports, and I can go to a balance sheet. And then while we're here, I'm going to actually minimize this. We're going to come back and look at these exciting T accounts in a couple of minutes. But if I minimize this, now you can see the pop-up. So right-click, duplicate, and now on this one, I want to go to Reports and run my income statement. Right, so here's a balance sheet, and here's an income statement. The income statement, you're going to start off with, by default, a 3-month period comparison. So you can certainly change that here, or just show a date range, right? So let's just say I wanted to show, I'll go back to the beginning of the year. So we'll go to January, and we'll update that. Not comparing with anything. I just want a simple blank profit and loss so that when I create a transaction, you can see the impact. Balance sheet is cumulative, of course. So just to have a balance sheet as of the month of March. Now we go back to here, and let's create a new invoice. So in the write-up, I gave the example. Let's say we're invoicing for a product or service for $100,000. Now, of course, we need a name. So let's go with Always Right Incorporated, because the customer's always right. Okay, and we'll put in a date. Today's date. We'll put in a due date. We'll say it's due a week later. I never like due on receipt. This comes up a lot in the accounting forums that I participate in, especially in the one that I had started, that we run at schoolofbookkeeping.com now, called ABO. The due dates, the due on receipt. I get what it's supposed to mean. It means as soon as you get it, you're supposed to pay it. But most of us on the AP side don't take it that way. Most of us look at that and say, okay, I'll give it 30 days and I'll pay it then. And that's not our intention. So I think it's better, it makes the message a little clearer if you just give it a week. And that way they know, okay, it's due in a week. All right, I better get a check out. It's due next week, right? I think it creates a better sense of urgency, which is what you're trying to accomplish with due on receipt, but it's not as effective. Just my opinion, my little personal rant. Over here, we can create a new inventory item. Be aware that inventory items aren't necessarily limited to just inventory items. If you're trying to describe a service that you offer, that goes here too. So let's just call this service I offer. Okay, and then the item name is that service. Obviously, you would put something more appropriate and applicable here. And then, of course, by default, it's just checked off that I sell this item. But certainly, if it is inventory, you'd want to check off that you purchased this item. Now, as of the time I'm recording this, Xero does not track quantities, and it doesn't handle inventory per se. But you can still do the accounting for it. You just have to keep track of your cost of goods sold and inventory balances. Xero will not do that for you. There's a good chance that by the time you're watching this video, that will have changed. But either way, whether it has or hasn't, there are add-ons to Xero that will track inventory and then sync seamlessly with Xero. So if that's important to you, then I encourage you to check out the Xero add-ons area. And there are many products in there that do a really good job of tracking inventory and then sync with Xero. On the other hand, if you actually do purchase a service, let's say you have a subcontractor that does this work for you. Let's say you have a bookkeeping service and you have bookkeepers that you subcontract work to. So even though it's a service, you still purchase the item because you purchased the service from somebody else and then resell that service to your customer. So in a case like that, you may want to check off that you purchased this item. Now, so on the purchasing side, you might want to have an account like, you could call it cost of goods sold. I would prefer to call it direct labor. Right, and it's not going to let me add that in from here. So you have to add it in yourself. So for now, we'll just use an account that's there, cost of goods sold. And when I say you have to add it in yourself, I mean you have to go back to the chart of accounts and add it in that way. There's no option to add a new account from within this dialog. Selling this item, we'll go to, I think, 400 as our general sales account. And then if it's taxable, obviously you would assign the appropriate tax rate. This part's very straightforward. You probably really don't need me to explain it to you, but I'm doing it anyway just in case. And we're going to leave the unit price blank. This way, when we sell the service, when we post the invoice, we put in what we want. So we're selling something for $100,000. Okay, and it's a non-taxable sale. We're going to say it's going to sales. So notice, and I mentioned this in the write-up, that even though I have an item, and I link that item to this account, I can change this here. I can say, you know what, I want to call this other revenue. And that's not going to upset anything. It just gives you the flexibility to say, okay, as a standard, I want it going to the 400 sales account. But in this particular case, for whatever reason I might have, I want it going to a different revenue account. So notice over here, I can approve it, I can approve and add another, or I can approve and print. So approve is, to save the invoice, or I can save it. Right, so I can save as a draft, I can save and continue editing so I don't lose my changes, right? That's important because we're working in the cloud. I can save and submit for approval, or I can save and add another. So approve means I'm done, it's ready to post. So let's click approve. Now, as I mentioned in the write-up, when I record a sale, and this is where the T accounts come in. Don't you just love T accounts? They're just my favorite. So the first transaction here is a sale is made for $100,000. So I credit sales, credits increase income, and I debit accounts receivable for $100,000. Very straightforward, but it's important to be thinking about this, especially if you're an accounting or bookkeeping professional using Xero. If you're the end user as an owner of a company using it, it may not be as critically important because hopefully you'll have the accounting or bookkeeping professional who is looking at this with you and thinking it through in these terms. But it's definitely helpful to understand what's going on there. So the invoice is approved. Let's go refresh our balance sheet now. And that's what I love about doing this, because now when I refresh my balance sheet, it should come up right away, reflecting my invoice. And since there are no other transactions on the books, it becomes really clear. I have accounts receivable now of $100,000. I've got no money in the bank. I haven't even created a bank account here. And that's that. Then I go over to my income statement and refresh that page. Remember, we're dealing with tabs in a browser, so you've got to click the refresh button to reflect any updates that you've made. And once this refreshes, of course, we'll see the income of $100,000, and that'll be our net income because there's no expenses on the books. So now we've gotten through the first part of the sales cycle, which is posting the invoice. So how do we deal with payments on invoices? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Let's go to accounts and sales. And when you're in the sales area, now that we do have an invoice posted, you'll see it show up right here in awaiting payment. So I can click on the $100,000 and say, okay, I just got the check in the mail. I'm going to deposit it into the bank in a minute. And I would simply check this off and click off deposit over here. Now, if you had multiple checks received from multiple invoices, and we're going to take a look at that when I switch over to the demo company in a minute, then you could check them all off and you would be able to record a batch deposit. So you would have a single deposit with a lump sum total that matches what's actually getting deposited at the bank, which may in fact consist of several checks paying off several invoices. So just know, don't worry, that option is and will be there when you have multiple invoices to select. Now, I don't think I've even created a bank account, so I believe if I click deposit, it's going to give me a hard time. So I must choose a bank account, and of course I can't add a bank account from here, so it's not going to let me complete this transaction. But so you get the idea of how this flow works, we're going to go over to the demo company, and we're going to show you the rest of the picture. But I wanted you to mainly see the impact. And I want to get you in the habit, if you're watching this, that when you're playing around, and you should play around in the demo company, that you do this. You do it the same way. Create a blank company, rather, not so much in the demo company because that's already got all kinds of data in it, but create a blank company just to play with. It'll be worth spending the money for a month of Xero subscription just to play around in a completely blank company file. So I'm going to close these tabs now, and we're going to switch over to our demo company. Now, in the demo company, let's go back over to accounts and sales, because that's where we always want to go when we're dealing with any part of the sales cycle in Xero. And here, of course, we have a bunch of stuff awaiting payment. Now, keep in mind, if you watched the previous lesson, and if you haven't, you should, because I kind of build these things incrementally on purpose. In other words, they're in a certain order for a certain reason. If you go back there, then you've already seen how using the bank feeds, as the money comes in, if we were paid electronically, you could simply apply the money received to a group of invoices, and that way this part's handled. So you can do it one way or the other. This will probably come in more likely when you receive a check, and you want to record the check right away. You don't want to wait till you've deposited the check and then the check clears, which could take a few days. So you want to get it recorded right away. This is the way you do it. So you go into awaiting payment, and let's say that we got a check from City Limousines, right? So I would check off these two. Let's say it's all of these, right? So we check them off. Notice up here it lets me know there's 4 items selected for a total of $1169.95. And then I come over here and choose deposit. And notice now it says new batch deposit because it recognized that I selected a bunch of items. Down here I choose the account. I can put in a reference if I want to, but this will show me a deposit total of $1169.95, which presumably will come in on the banking side within a day or two of this once the checks have all cleared, and that will get matched up in this deposit when I do the bank feeds. So you can do it one way or the other. Now, going back to our T accounts, what happens? I get the payment from my customer for the $100,000. What happens is then I close out my accounts receivable. So I credit accounts receivable and I debit my bank. These are both asset accounts, which means that so a debit increases an asset account, a credit decreases an asset account. So that's how it balances perfectly. But it's important to understand and think that through, because if you understand that, then you can be thinking through what's going on here. I'm reducing my accounts receivable by $1169.95, which means if I run my balance sheet, once I save this, it will reflect that change. And what will also be reflected is the fact that my bank balance will have increased by $1169.95. And that, my friends, is how you record a batch deposit. Now, question is, why isn't Xero letting me click deposit here? As is often the case, when you can't do something, there's a very good reason for it. So notice here, if I follow instructions, which is something I struggle with at times, it says you must add a reference. But what if I got several checks from several different companies and I want to deposit them together? Let's cancel this and let's see what that looks like. So now I go City Limousines. I got all these, but then I also got a check from Bayside. So let's include that. Better yet, let's include Basket Case. I like Basket Case because it's a nice big number. So now we've got checks from 2 different customers that are all going to get deposited together. I've got 5 items selected for $2,084.50. I click deposit. I still have to add a reference. And I bring this up to point out the fact that you may not want to do a check number, and notice down here you can put in a reference or check number that's associated with each one. So that brings up another question. I got one check for city limousines, but it looks like we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 entries. So what you'll want to do there is indicate that it's the same check number for all of these. That way when you're looking at a report later or looking back at the bank feeds, you can see very clearly by the fact that it's the same check number received on the same date that it's obviously one check that added up to all of this. That's how you'll handle something like that. But you must add a reference, so you have to put something in here. And remember, this is the reference that's at the high level on the banking side that refers to the deposit in total. So whatever it is, you can just put deposit if you don't have anything else good to say. And over here on checking account, so this might be check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then these might all be, again, the same check, 5, 9, 8, 7, or 6, 7. Let's go shift home, Control C. So I can just Control V, Control V, Control V. And then we'll record our deposit. And now, my friends, we've closed out the receivable. We've closed out the sales cycle. The money is now going to show up in our account. Let's go look at the account. Let's go see it. I want to see my $20.84.50 show up in my bank. I always like to see it, right? Seeing is believing. I want to make sure it worked. So let's just click right up here on checking account. And there it is. There's my payment multiple items. It says it's unreconciled. Ooh, let's go reconcile it. That'll be fun. You probably won't be able to reconcile it because I kind of made it up. So I doubt there's actually a deposit in here for that amount. So we're going to fix that in a minute. And also because I want to show you one other thing. So notice back to the bank feeds, we've got some transactions that are matching up. And you're going to see where we have this e-bank deposit of $1,000. So I want to play with this for a minute. So let's go back to the actual bank. I'm going to close this getting started dialog. You have me for that right now. So let's go back. Let's hit back on our browser. And let's play. Let us play. So let's delete this. Let's go in here. Payment multiple items. Let's blow it out. Options. Remove and redo. The transaction has been removed. I can now redo this transaction by going to reconcile or by adding a payment. Perfect. Let's say basket case paid us this $914.55 plus another $1,000 for something. Well, I could go right here and click on the invoice and adjust the invoice, right, and include the difference. But I want to show you another way. And again, this is another reason for going to the bank feeds before anything else. So let's go reconcile 29 items. We're really only going to go reconcile one of them. I'm going to go to page 2 because I know that's where it is. So here's e-bank deposit. So let's say we know that this $1,000 came from basket case. So we're going to come over here to match, then find and match. And then watch what Xero does that's really smart. So let's find that invoice in here. There's my $914.55. And so it lets me know right down here my total is out by $85.45. So I could create a new transaction right here, a new received money, which I think is kind of cool. But also, I can click on basket case right here. And that takes me right into the invoice. And I can edit the invoice here. But notice what Xero did. It opened it up in a new tab, which to me is really smart because now I can click on this tab to remember, okay, I'm out by $85.45. That's what needs to get added to this. So then I come back here, and I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to put in a description that says the other thing I forgot about, right? And we'll just say it's 1, and wait, how much was that? See how nice this is that I can go back? $85.45. So the unit price is $85.45. It goes to 400 sales, and we're going to say this is non-taxable, tax exempt. So it was just a service I sold. So that way it gets my total up. Because remember, if it's taxable, now we're going to add tax onto the $85.45. It's not going to balance to the $1,000. Hopefully you followed along with that. So making it non-taxable means I only increase it by the exact amount I need to get it to an even $1,000. And I click Update. and I'm done. So you see why it's useful to do it this way, because if I just went straight to the invoice, I wouldn't have the benefit of seeing exactly what I'm off by. And I realize you can do the math and it's easy enough, but when you think through, when you're trying to move quickly and trying to do a lot of things at once, I don't want to have to do the math. I want to have this right here so I can click back over to this tab and make sure I don't make any mistakes. Because you know what takes more time and costs more? Is if I go in, edit the invoice, and add in the wrong amount only to find out that it still doesn't match because I added in the wrong amount or I forgot to make it tax exempt. Whatever it is, mistakes like that can really slow you down. When you're thinking about the workflow in Xero, you want to think in terms of what's the most efficient way to do it. To me, the most efficient way is to do it through the bank feeds so I can have the benefit of going into a dialog like this and click to open it up in a new tab, make my adjustments. Now notice this still says it's out, but that's because, remember what I said a few minutes ago, I've got to refresh the page. I'm still working in a browser. It's easy to forget that because the software that we're working in is so beautiful, like they call it beautiful accounting, that it's easy to forget that you're actually working in a browser. So now when I refresh, not only does it update, it actually immediately says, oh, we've got a match. And then I can click OK. And then it says the invoice was raised after the payment you're reconciling to. Please check that you are matching the correct invoice due before continuing. So what we want to do is, what it's doing is, because I just used this as an example, so I created an invoice with a date that comes after. See, the deposit was made March 12th. We have an invoice that's dated March 13th. So that's very smart of Xero to recognize that and flag that and say, hey, something's not right. Why would you get a payment before the date of the invoice itself? So that is how you would post an invoice, receive a payment, and get it into the bank. That's pretty much the whole sales cycle. But we have a couple of more things that we want to take a look at here. Quotes have been introduced into Xero as a great way to prepare a quote or an estimate that you're going to send out to clients to get them to approve the project based on what you've told them it's going to cost. The quotes area will also be found in the same area as the sales, and in fact, when you go to accounts and click on sales, you'll see that there's two sections. One in the top is the actual posted sales, and below that you'll see the quotes and you'll see the workflow. So you can see which quotes have been sent out and which quotes that you've gone in and marked as having been approved. And then, as you're going to see, the quotes are very easy to copy over into an invoice once your client has approved it so that you can turn it into an actual posting sales transaction. So Xero has the ability to add quotes. So let's go into sales again. And we have a video on our blog already about this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But in new, you have a quote, and a quote is going to be just what it says. It's a quote. It's an estimate. Here's what I plan to charge you for the product or service. You send that to your client. They approve it. Notice down here it shows you your quote. So it's the same kind of workflow as what you have for actual invoices and payments, but down here. And once something is accepted, of course, that means it's been turned into an invoice that's awaiting payment. So that's the quote process. You'll see the quote form itself is not much different than the invoice because it's the same information. It's just describing it a little differently in terms of the fact that it's not a sale yet, right? We're saying we're going to hopefully turn it into a sale, but in the meantime, we're sending this as a proposal so that the client or prospective client can approve this, and once they do, then it becomes a sale. Then we can get payment on it, then we can deposit the payment into the bank. So that's pretty much your quote portion of the sales cycle. So that's like a step before the sale actually starts, right? Where we're trying to get the sale. And I want to show you what else is in here. So now what we're going to take a look at is what happens when I want to refund somebody. So I posted an invoice, they paid me, they say, you know what, I'm not happy, I want a refund. Very, very simple. Just issue a credit note. And as you can see, the credit note is pretty straightforward. It looks an awful lot like the invoice form because it should, because it's basically just reversing an invoice and saying, okay, I'm going to issue a refund and send the person their money back. So very simple, very straightforward. Fill it out. You know, it should be probably the same item that you included on the original sale, and it should probably, now the account may be different here. You might want to, if you're like me, then I want to add a new account right here that's called Sales Returns and Allowances. And that's what's called a Contra Income account. It goes against income. It'll show up on my profit and loss as a negative. That way, separately, I can show here are my sales, here are my returns and allowances, here's the money I had to send back for customers who weren't happy. For a lot of reasons, it's really important to be able to track that kind of information so that when I look at my company, when I'm analyzing my profit and loss, I can look at that and see, Is there a trend? Are we increasing with respect to our refunds against our sales? That could indicate that there's a problem. Maybe there's a quality control issue that needs to be addressed. These are the kinds of things where we can use the numbers to get a gauge on what's going on the operations side of our business so that we can look into things and correct problems, hopefully long before they become significant problems. So that's just one example of a reason why it's really important to think this stuff through in terms of, and this is going back to what I said right at the top of this lesson about understanding the flow of transactions. So understanding that when I'm issuing a refund, if I post it directly against sales, all that's going to do is it's going to bury the refund inside the sales account, so my sales number will be a little less. It's technically correct, but does it give me the information I really need? Because if you talk to me on a consulting basis about doing your books, I'm going to tell you right up front, I don't care so much about getting a tax return done. Yes, of course, it's important, and we need to have the numbers together for that purpose. But to me, what's much more important is being able to draw information out of your financial software, out of your accounting software, out of Xero, that enables me to analyze the company and help you make important decisions about your company. And if you're a bookkeeping or accounting professional taking this course so that you have an understanding of how to use Xero to provide accounting and bookkeeping services to your clients, then it's especially important for you to hear what I'm saying right here. It's great to know how to use the forms. It's more important to understand how these transactions are flowing so that you can think through in terms of what do I want the picture to look like at the end of the day? What do I want showing up on my P&L? Do I really want to bury refunds inside of sales? Probably not. I'd much rather see that separately so I can compare the refunds to the sales, look at percentages, analyze trends, and make decisions, especially if I see that our trend in issuing refunds is increasing when compared with sales. That's really important information to have. So that's what I want to encourage you to make sure that you're thinking about so that you're not just doing data entry and filling out forms, but you're actually creating something meaningful with a product like Xero. Really, really important. So that's my rant on your credit notes. And that pretty much does complete the entire sales cycle in Xero. Let's go back to we'll go back to the dashboard for a second, and then we're going to jump back into our sales. And we're going to take one last look in our sales area. So we've really covered everything because we can post an invoice, and if you save it as a draft, as I showed you when you had those options, those are going to show up here. Once you approve it, it shows up here as awaiting payment. Our choices here, create an invoice, create a quote, create a repeating invoice. So in that case, you're going to get options for what the recurrence should be. Is it going to be monthly, weekly, whatever that is? I'll drill in and show you what it looks like. But again, it should be something that's pretty straightforward. So over here, next invoice date you entered has already occurred because I just kind of clicked in there. So the invoice date is March 18th. That's the day I'm recording this. Over here you say you repeat this transaction every 1 month or every 1 week, right? So you can do it in terms of months or weeks. And then the due date you can say is a set number of days. So let's say 7 days after the invoice date. That goes back to what I said when I did the invoice. And the end date. So if you want to say that this only goes on for, let's say I have a 12-month contract, then I want to set the end date to be, 12 months after this initial invoice date. Everything else is the same as an invoice. Who it's going to, what's the reference. The branding has to do with the format of the invoice itself, the sales form. And over here, it's exactly the same as any invoice. You're going to fill in your item description, quantity, price, and so on and so forth. So that's the repeating invoice. It's a recurring invoice is the term a lot of you may be familiar with. Same thing. Let's go back into the sales area. And now we're going to take one last look for real. Accounts, sales. So we've seen the invoice, the quote, the repeating invoice, and the credit note. And I mentioned earlier, now that we're in the demo company, you can actually see what this looks like. I can invoice to all my contractors, or I can invoice all the people in my training contact group. Since I mentioned it, and in case you're not familiar with it, let's quickly go over to our contacts area. So if you're wondering, how do I do that? It's very easy. You go into contacts, you create new group, and you can name that group for your customer. And that way you can add all the contacts who belong in that customer so that they're all set up in their own group. There's one other thing that I should show you because I haven't touched on it, but I did mention it in the write-up, I believe. Actually, I may not have, but I'm going to mention it now anyway. Go into settings and general settings, and we're going to take a look at tracking codes. So tracking codes are a way of assigning another item in a drop-down in any transaction in Xero. So a very common use case of this these days is that we want to be able to track income and expenses by customer. So even though you have a customer's area within contacts, there's no opportunity as of now to choose one from a drop-down in an expense transaction. Obviously, when you send an invoice, that's to a customer, so that's by default tied into that customer. But there's no opportunity when you're recording any kind of an expense in Xero to get access to a customer drop-down such that you could assign the expense. Here's how you do that. So you'll create the tracking code, and that means that you'll use this in all sales transactions and all expense transactions so that you can create reports that are, let's say, filtered for just this one particular tracking code, and that way you can get your profit and loss by customer or profit and loss by project, because your tracking code here, and you can call it customers, or better yet, call it projects. Right, so this way you use the tracking code to list all your different projects, and then every income and every expense item can be associated with those projects. And then you might go back into your customer details to indicate, which project or projects you have going with that particular customer. So that's how you handle job costing in Xero. And as I mentioned before, there are many add-ons to Xero that will work with Xero that will help you identify ways of doing more sophisticated job costing if that's something that's important to you. The other thing I didn't mention that I want to talk about here is payments. When we enter invoices, the question is, okay, great, I can enter an invoice, I can send it out to somebody, and when the payment does come in, it goes into my bank account, whether it's by check or electronically, and I can see how in the bank feeds I can match it up with the invoice, or I can go into the awaiting payments part in the sales area, and I can indicate what invoices got paid by which checks I've just received that I'm now going to deposit into the bank account. But what about capturing those payments? How do we get payments from our customers in Xero? And that's where I'm going to bring you to the add-ons area within Xero. There's a lot of really good add-ons that work with Xero. So it's really important, if you're going to use Xero, that you pay careful attention to this part, which is the add-ons. That's what's going to complete the picture in a lot of cases in terms of what you'll need to do with Xero as your core GL package, and then these add-ons to handle things like job costing or just bigger picture project management stuff. So now we're talking about payments. And notice you have the community out there who's doing the work for you. They're letting you know what works. Rerun is very highly rated. There's only 4 reviews, but if you click through and look at them, it's rated very highly by the customers. There's another one in here that I saw, Invoice Sherpa. 18 reviews, and they're all consistently amazing. PayPal has a couple bad reviews on it, and notice it's got a low rating in terms of stars here. So take your time, go through this. I noticed that Active Collab, which is one of my favorite project management apps, has an integration with Xero. I knew that Active Collab gives you the ability to track time and expenses and then invoice that. But it was exciting to me to see that Active Collab is integrated with Xero so that you could probably track those time and expenses, send an invoice out from Active Collab, which, by the way, also has some nice reminder features where it reminds your customers about payment, which is also what Invoice Sherpa does. But it's nice to see that here. No reviews yet. It's probably fairly new. Really cool app, though. So look at the add-ons that work with Xero to accomplish what you want to. In terms of capturing payments, there's a few here. Now, Invoice Sherpa, I took a quick look at. It's not clear if they actually process payments. It looks more like they manage your receivables when you first invoice them, and they send out reminders and do that sort of thing. So you'll want to go through here. BigCommerce, if you sell online, is a great option. ZenCart, again, these are e-commerce solutions. OpenCart, TransferMate. So Stripe certainly will work, and that goes with Xero. 17 reviews, only 2 stars. I haven't looked at this one, but I've used Stripe. We use Stripe at schoolofbookkeeping.com, and I think it's pretty good, but I haven't seen how it integrates with Xero. So check these out and, frankly, make your own decision about which solution is going to be best for you. But definitely don't ignore the add-ons, because that's where, if you get stuck in terms of how do I process payments, this is where you want to go. This is what you want to check out. So as always, I hope that you've learned something here and had some fun along the way. If you have any questions and you're an enrolled student at schoolofbookkeeping.com, please use the answers form to ask your questions. If you're not an enrolled student, enroll. Otherwise, you can take advantage of any of our public forums, and I'm sure somebody will get back to you with an answer eventually. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this, learned something along the way, and look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. As you can see, Xero makes it really easy to post and track your sales transactions and then ultimately get that matched in with your bank feeds. Next, we're going to look at the other side of that coin, which of course is the expenses and how we spend money and how that gets recorded in Xero.